Good, hello, and thanks for watching another Sunday case study. I'm really sorry about last Sunday where some of you saw my Sunday case study before I tried to edit it, messed it up, and ended up just taking it down. Basically, half of the video I was sort of clearing my throat and drinking coffee because I was pausing it when I thought I was recording it, and essentially all of that good stuff got wasted. So, annoyingly, really sorry about that. I do owe you another Sunday case study. So maybe this Wednesday I can squeeze out another one. Anyway, this week we're looking at the hands of Margaret Thatcher. Now, I was actually kind of drawn to doing this reading because um, Margaret Thatcher has a very unique hand. She was even referred to as claw hand in the press at the time, in the media, when she was in power. Now, I'm kind of reaching back a little bit into the past, I can appreciate, but I know this is not all that relevant, but I felt like it was because I haven't actually read the hands of someone who is an egocentric hand type. Now, if you want to know more about what I mean about that hand type, have a look at my website on my 12 hand type classification method on my blog. I'll put a description below this video. But it's a very rare hand type, and recently I was talking to one of my clients, and they had kind of self-analyzed themselves as being an egocentric hand type, and I had to kind of provide my insight, which was that they weren't. Actually, it's very rare. It's hard to come across someone actually just as who is as self-absorbed, self-centered, selfish, um, unfeeling, uncaring, insensitive, um, narcissistic, even. And that essentially these traits are these aren't good things, are they really? But the egocentric hand type is the worst of all of them. It's not to say that all egocentric people are all bad, and it's not to say that any one person should be judged before, prior to their actions, because we're all capable of good and bad things. The narrow shape to the hand, the long fingers as well. I've got some fairly good images here. I mean, these two aren't incredible, and this one's terrible, but it is good for, you get the overall, actually, an impression here of just how thin, how long it is in conjunction with, I've got a good frame of reference here, in conjunction with her head, which really shows us just how big the hand is. For a good frame of reference, the thumb as well, it's kind of turned out, which is not a good sign in terms of, the way they view themselves. Again, this is kind of a narcissistic person liable to deceit. The egocentric hand type is one of two of the kind of more psychic hand types, the very long palm, long fingers. There is a great deal of intuition there. And as I say, it's not all bad when it comes to the egocentric, but if they were to learn how to consider others and utilize their talents for good, and really manage to see things from a different perspective. Essentially, if they were to learn to become less self-absorbed and consider others, then their hand type would actually change. And this sounds strange, but it does happen. People's hands, like literally their hand type can change over time, the shape of their hands and their fingers. So they can, be, um, let's say, for example, more commonly would be being an intuitive hand type and turning into an egocentric. That's possible. And I mentioned that the thumb is turned out. It's not actually all that turned out, as in, facing us when the palm is. So, I kind of take that back a little bit, but the thumb is certainly high set. It is very inwards, very narrow angle there. And again, that is selfishness and, the desire to procure for themselves, and they think about themselves. And this is actually the image from my website as an example of an egocentric hand. But this is definitely the best one of all here, and you get a real sense of who she is by this image in many respects in terms of just the psychological makeup. It's important to note that she had Dupuytren's contracture, trigger finger, or weaver's finger as it's sometimes referred to, and it's a disease where the ligaments, the tendons are continually contracting, and it creates this kind of um, claw-like sort of, increases that because the fingers curl in on themselves, and this begins often with the Mercury, the little finger. But the palm-shaped type hands, fingers, they're also claw-like anyway, just because of, the its pointed thumb, because of the pointed Mercury. There's something of a pointed Saturn as well. Jupiter stands alone in its development because it's somewhat crooked. I'm going to put this down to maybe arthritis to some degree. I'm not going to take too much away from the crookedness of Jupiter. I do think it needs to be taken into account a little, but the length of it is extreme. It's almost completely level with Saturn, and this is a sign of a superiority complex. She feels that she's better than others, or at least maybe that's not the right way to put it, because in her mind, other people should listen to her because she has the right ideas, she has the solutions. And that's not actually all that incorrect. The development of her ego is immense. Her or her understanding of her own capabilities is a little bit unrealistic, in fact, because it's longer than Apollo. She probably was something of a workaholic. And it was said actually that I heard anyway, fairly recently, she only required 4 hours sleep. I don't know how true that is, but that does make sense in a way. The narrow arm itself, the reduced amount of Venus by the way the lifeline tightly sort of hugs the Venus mount, reduces the overall size of the mount of Venus. I mean, there is kind of is no mount of Venus. And again, this is reducing the amount of physicality that's involved in order to kind of keep her going. So it makes sense actually that she wouldn't require all that much sleep, but it also reduces her charisma, personality, her warmth, her ability to provide others with affection and love and warmth of her own personality. She lacked in this regard. The thumb, before I move on with the thumb, it's very long. She's an immensely deep thinker, a powerful, in how she's able to conjure up, put her ideas to the test, and make those decisions. The need for control is very strong because the third phalanx of Jupiter is long. Um, the mount of Jupiter is the largest, easily. And it's kind of interesting because the fingers are very unusual in that Apollo is not as long as Jupiter, but it's still long. And it kind of begs the question, because what you should be doing when you read the hands is when you measure the fingers, measure by where they're set in the hand before measuring the lengths against each other. That's something I don't really go over all that much. Measure, measure the fingers as you like, but measure Saturn last. And this is because sometimes it's hard to know whether or not you have a short Saturn finger, or if in fact Apollo and Jupiter are just long. And I think what we have here is a bit of a combination of the both. We have a short Saturn finger and both long, certainly Jupiter and Apollo. So she cares about her public opinion, public image. She wants to achieve. She is vain. She cares about her appearance as well, um, and she seeks glory. Essentially, these are all the kind of, in conjunction with what we see with the Jupiter finger as well. The signs of a narcissist. Just this kind of self absorbed. But the Saturn finger being on the short side shows that she's going to do things in her own way, and she really has her own um, individual kind of sense of morality and ethics, and it's not healthy. Um, it's bent quite sharply at the tip, so there's This could indicate corrupted ethics and morality, corrupted duty, in fact, sense of duty, but it also could be shame or guilt. That's quite often seen with, actually, it's pretty crooked, and I would say it's crooked sense of ethics. At the same time, I kind of don't want to draw too much from it because of the possibility of arthritis. She's no spring chicken in this image, and arthritis affects around 70% of us. The Mercury finger is long. I mean, despite what you'll see in any of the images, it's long, but it is low set. All of the other fingers are fairly, even with each other, and then Mercury kind of drops off the end. This reveals insecurity, a lack of ability to be vulnerable and really show who she is. She probably sees emotion as weakness and conservatism. She's very reserved emotionally. Well, she was a conservative, makes perfect sense. The headline and the heartline, there's kind of it's not really all that much space there. This is a classic trait of an egocentric hand. They're not warm, they're not open. They're not open not only to how they present themselves and how much they're going to give to others. They're not going to part too much of themselves, but also they're not open to new ideas. It's quite narrow-minded way of thinking, and this is also evident by the lack of curvature of the headline. If it, kind of reached downwards more into lunar, we would see a greater space between the head and the heart line. We would see a greater ability to um, for mental give, if you like, adaptability, flexibility of thought and thinking ideas. And we don't really see that. And again, that's illustrated by the lack of an angle in the thumb here, because if someone can open their thumb out, 90 degrees, it shows an open mind. Further than that, it shows naivety. When we are unable, in fact, to open it past sort of 45 degrees, it shows a skeptic. It shows someone who is highly rational to the point where things are a bit too black and white in their world, and it's not actually, they're a bit too practical. Especially in the world of politics, it's really important to understand that not all circumstances can be fixed with a clear-cut rule. Some circumstances, some solutions require something of an approach that takes things into account and makes exceptions in certain circumstances. In short, there was no bending with her. There was no real flexibility. It was her way or the highway, and this is actually why she was the Iron Lady. There wasn't any room for negotiation. She was a tyrant. This is the hand of a tyrant. I kind of want to do right by her. I feel I don't want to be too negative here because whilst the heart line is very high set, again, this is showing a lack of capacity for considering others, loving others, a lack of capacity to love, full stop. Egocentric hands often fall into um, the aim and goal that they feel that they throw their life purpose into the pursuit of materials, in achieving in their career. They just kind of end up as workaholics and will throw anyone under the bus, including their own friends, in order to get ahead. That's a classic trait of an egocentric hand, and it's actually really sad. It's really sad that they don't know how to love. That's what's sad. I'm not trying to make a villain out of this person necessarily, because they weren't equipped with the tools when they were young. They likely were malnourished emotionally, and so didn't have the correct, understanding. They didn't have the correct guidance or role models. They didn't know, they didn't have that kind of frame of reference, and ended up kind of following a path. It's not just um, nurture, a lot of it's nature as well. There's always that classic question in psychology: is it just always them, or is it, their upbringing? It's both. That's always the answer. It's both. It's not, that one's not really up for debate. I'm sorry, it's been gone over so many times, and the answer is always both. So at some point, she made a decision herself to be this selfish in on some level because it suited her and it fed into her um, coping mechanisms potentially. But the other thing is, I do want to point out here, I don't want to make this all bad because the heartline does in fact reach up in between Saturn and Jupiter. She's not completely selfish. There is something of a sense of right and wrong. She is able, or was able to see that what she was doing was bad at times. So this, is it likely is actually shame and guilt. If I had seen the Heartline kind of stopping dead, it's not the best of images, I know, but I I I struggle to believe that she's all bad. I think there are the ingredients here of a sense of a conscience. I think there is shame and guilt. Now these lines here, this is, as I've mentioned, it's Jupiter's contraction. Actually, she was quite proud of what she called her weaver's finger, and it's because she knew actually that it is passed down through it's seen much more commonly in the hands of Huguenots who were descendant of the Vikings, who were descendants of Neanderthals. So this is why we see Dupuytren's contracture with people who have 3%, around that or more Neanderthal DNA. I myself have it slightly, and I have 3% Neanderthal, well, 2.9. And this actually might be where she has her instinctive streak, and it's quite a rare combination for someone to have such an inherently intuitive hand type. This is a psychic hand type, let's not forget. To be so rational and narrow and lacking in that ability to adapt and be flexible, not just with her character and how much she's willing to provide others in terms of her efforts and who she is and give. Um, but in terms of her ability, her thinking, that's really unusual. Most people who are of an intuitive hand type, either the intuitive hand type or an egocentric, are much more abstract, much more imaginative, and inclined to say, well, how about we try this? What if we do this? There's there's none of that with her hand. She's thinking we're doing this, and that's that. Egocentric hands have an ability to make the most of any given opportunity and situation. They utilize their instincts to seize the opportunity and profit for themselves, to benefit for themselves. I want you to look at the thumb here. I mean, just look at it in contrast with the rest of the hand, the rest of the fingers. I mean, Jupiter, outstanding really, because it's all very wide. That strength of domination there, control, authority. Um, she was a powerful person in terms of her authority, and judgment, highly ambitious. But the thumb as well, look at just how powerful that is as well. This is her personality. The thumb almost looks to kind of say, hello, Jupiter, I am your support. I'm going to rise up and poke out of the hand in the same direction as you. And it's because her personality was extremely Jupiterian. She was um, dominant, tyrannical, really. Bossy is an understatement. Even the hair. This is known as power hair in as something of a psychological kind of residual self-image. She exuded um, her own sense of worth with everything that she did. And again, this is that very sort of narcissistic and actually very vain qualities, traits. I think one thing I find really interesting is this. It looks like, I'm not sure if I'm looking at this right, but it kind of looks like an X formed out of the convergence of two fate lines. When this happens, it is misfortune in a person's career, essentially. There's some sort of misjudgment, an error. It's bad luck, certainly, but there's some kind of error involved. And this occurs at around about the, I would say, 65. And also, when you look at the lifeline as well, it sort of looks to me like here's the lifeline. Okay, it's coursing around here, it's doing its thing. And then just on the inside of this, you have clearly a Mars line. And what's really interesting here is that the Mars line is actually more dominant than the lifeline itself. And a lot of people would say she's got a double lifeline. It's not the case. It's almost as though her determination is stronger than her life force itself. And this kind of carries weight with that whole 4 hours sleep theory, because she was so driven, so ambitious and determined to do what it is that she wanted to do, that it kind of oversaw her lifestyle, the way in which she lived her life, and her own kind of bodily needs even. And here's the thing, at 65, in conjunction, when you read this alongside the lifeline, this is around about 65 here, roughly. It's not an exact science, but look, the Mars line tails inwards, and it coincides with what I think is a cross here. Now, I know there's a lot of ifs and buts here, but it seems like a bit too much of a coincidence. At 65, she resigned. She stepped down and John Major took over. She was challenged, essentially, and she decided enough's enough. And it's almost like the Mars line, the god of war, took a back seat, and it's like she took the fight somewhere else. She took it closer to home. She took it within. And look at the Mars mount itself in a Mars. It's ridiculously powerful. This is someone who not only is good at arguing, it's who she is. She cannot live without a bit of conflict in her life. And here's the other thing. The loyalty line, it hits the Mars line where the Mars line decides to kind of take the fight indoors, if you like. So it's almost like she was loyal to nothing but her career, um, her need to fight, essentially. That's what this is. The loyalty line affects the Mars line. I'm not sure if it's crossing over and hitting the lifeline, but not too long before this stepping down, it looks as though there's something of travel here. Maybe there's something of a triangle here at the. This is probably assets. She probably, was gearing up to. It wasn't an on-the-spot decision. I think she probably started to, make the move over and shift and put things in place before she resigned. The all of the fingers are relatively pointed, um, with the exception of Jupiter. So the thumb being pointed shows us someone who is a big spender, refined taste, and might need to catnap. Mercury shows us someone with a sharp tongue. Quite literally, she was witty, but really quick of thought, able to just snap back a response. Precisely the kind of tool you need when you are in a hot debate. The Apollo finger being pointed shows us someone who is inspired, essentially much more of an intuitive sign, a much warmer sign to have something like this. And it shows that she was actually inspired by um, works of art and creativity, and it's through this, in fact, that she probably needed a little bit more coaxing and exploring, encouragement to develop her own, in fact, artistic skills, because these probably were quite likely being a very water hand, long palm, long fingers. So she probably could relate to the arts, in fact. Um, I'm not sure exactly which one. There would have been one there that really sang to her. Maybe, in fact, it was singing itself. She does have an angle of pitch here, which is quite strong. People who are very able to get up on stage and sing themselves have a very long Jupiter finger in conjunction with a very long Mercury finger. It's not as high set as we'd like, but maybe she was something of a singer when she was younger, or enjoyed music, had a real appreciation for it, and became, inspired very sort of intuitively in that way. She probably saw expensive things and thought, I'll have that. You know, it just sort of came to her. And this is actually something of a contradiction in her nature. Whereas in all other facets of her life, she was probably very practical and, played it safe, very cautious. But when it came to the arts, she was a bit different. It's a weird one because she probably took a lot of money out of the arts, a lot of funding. Anyway, pointed Saturn finger. It's, pretty much pointed here. It actually shows a potential ability towards mediumship. And again, this is very this is her receiving information in a very sort of unfiltered way. And it's all in part of how she was able to make the most of every given opportunity to benefit her, though, and her alone, unfortunately, it seems. And probably those who were allied with her because, you know, she saw them as being able to benefit her in some way. The Jupiter thing is the only one that really stands out. It's a little bit more squared off. I mean, I wouldn't say it's completely square, but it is kind of squarish. And that shows us that law, order, regulation, not so much principle. Yeah, principle, um, but in particular order. And these principles were upheld in a way that was very sort of practical. And she was someone who, and this is a funny one, because Saturn is so short, she kind of had her own rule book. She wrote that rule book, if you like, and then decided that this was going to be, this is how it is. We're going to stick to this rule book, but I'm going to write this rule book myself because actually, I have my own ideas about what's best for others, and that's sort of what a short Saturn finger shows us. They have their own unorthodox ideas of society and how it should run. So I think I'm going to wrap it up there, really. I just wanted to point out how you can really see in this image, actually pre kind of Jupiter's contracture, just how long this Mercury finger is. Consider just how low set it is. You can really get a sense as to just how pointed it is here as well. It's remarkably sharp. And Apollo and Saturn don't appear to be as pointed as in later life. So it's almost like she honed certain instinctive or intuitive abilities, but again, utilized these for her own gain, unfortunately. And look as well at just how I kind of wish I'd started with this image, to be honest. Just how the angle of the hand is kind of doing, it's like a sort of boomerang shape. Again, this is her thinking of herself and how she can gain out of this scenario. Crazy. Apollo doesn't even seem nearly as long in this image. Whereas in this one, much later on in life, you can clearly see it's long. It's a long Apollo finger. I mean, look at it in conjunction. It's like the actually her own sense of the pursuit of joy and happiness grew as she got older, which is a good sign, actually quite healthy. Partly selfishly, myself, in fact, I wanted to read this hand because I just find it so fascinating. Um, I don't have any kind of feelings really, particularly any positive ones towards, this lady and what she did and what she represented. But the hand itself is absolutely fascinating, and you can really see why. I hope you understand what I mean when I kind of say, provide this as an example of an egocentric hand in that it's kind of claw-like. You can sort of see what I mean here. It's kind of devoid of um, feeling and compassion in that very kind of tropey, um, villainous way, if that makes sense. Is that visual representation of selfishness in the palms. But like I say, it's it's sad, and I'm sure there were positive traits. And actually, I think had she lived for much longer, the older she got, she probably grew warmer over time. At least that's what the hand is telling me a little bit. Certainly, in this image here, she's older again than this one here, and you can see Apollo's rising. It's getting longer, and then in this final image here, it's even longer again. So it's kind of, I think she was probably warming up. Too little, too late, maybe, because she will forever be remembered as something of a tyrant by most people, at least in Britain, anyway. So there we go. That's Maggie Thatcher. Let me know what your thoughts are on this palm reading. Again, I know it's a little bit sort of um, outdated, I suppose, not really very relevant at the moment, but I kind of wanted to put to bed what an egocentric hand is. And if you are looking at your own hands, just be aware. I mean, it's great that you're doing that. Don't stop reading your own hands. It's part of the process of learning palmistry, but just be aware that they are attached to you and you are too close to the situation to read yourself impartially. You're not going to take yourself for therapy or counseling. You're not going to counsel yourself. You need to, even if you're a counselor or psychologist, you need to go and see another for an impartial opinion. And it's much the same with hands. Reading your own hands is a little bit like diagnosing a medical issue by use of the internet. You're not gonna necessarily, you might be reading into things, you might be interpreting because of your own thoughts and feelings. Your judgment's clouded, essentially. So don't stop doing it, but just be aware that it's not really possible to be impartial. So thank you very much for watching. I will see you next Sunday. You might see another one pop up because I do owe everyone another Sunday case study. I'll probably redo that one I did last week, and I've got clearer images of her hands as well. So thanks very much for watching. I will see you on the next one.